I'd swear that drip wasn't water. It was the metronome of my mental breakdown. I was 3 rungs up the aluminum ladder, one hand gripping the aluminum, and the other frantically stirring a tub of roofing cement that, frankly, smelled more like ancient swamp mud than modern sealant. The rain, bless its heart, was coming down with the determination of a mortgage collector. It wasn't a downpour, mind you. It was that insidious, relentless drizzle, the kind that finds the one microscopic hole in your rain gear and starts a personal, localized flood. My problem, my magnificent $500 a month HOA fee problem, was the ancient copper gutter above my front door. Specifically, one tiny corroded spot near the downspout connector. Every drop of rain in this particular zip code seemed to congregate there, forming a perfect crystalline bead, only to plunge 4 feet and strike the concrete sidewalk with a precise, high-pitched plink. Plink. It was the sound of a bad idea, repeated 22 times per minute, 24/7. And it was driving me insane. I jabbed the cement into the offending fissure with the conviction of a man who knows this cheap fix will last approximately 3 hours, tops. I was soaked to the bone, mud splattered across my glasses, and just trying to survive until the rain stopped, so I could maybe, possibly, call a professional. But professionals cost money, and I had already spent my monthly sanity budget on that industrial-sized bag of microwave popcorn. Plink. That's when I heard the squeak of synthetic, water-resistant footwear approaching. My stomach dropped like a bucket of roofing tar. I didn't even need to turn around. I knew the squeak. It belonged to Brenda. Brenda, or the gutter guard, as she was now permanently filed in the dark, dusty archives of my mind, approached my property line like a heavily armed birdwatcher in a safari vest and matching waterproof trousers. She carried an umbrella, obviously, but she also carried a clipboard, because Brenda doesn't just endure the weather, she documents it. "Leo!" she called out, her voice cutting through the drizzle with the sharp, acidic precision of a lemon knife. She didn't shout. She articulated every syllable, as if she were dictating a formal complaint to a jury. I sighed, pulling my head back from under the gutter lip. The cement was already washing away. "Morning, Brenda. Lovely day for whatever it is you're doing." She ignored my pathetic attempt at deflection. Her eyes, magnified slightly behind her prescription sunglasses. Yes, she wears sunglasses in the rain. Don't ask me why. I assume it's to shield her from the glare of common folk, fixed on my pathetic ladder setup. "I see your efforts are, shall we say, performative," she said, tapping the clipboard with a pen that I swear looked gold-plated. "I'm applying a professional-grade sealant to mitigate the noise pollution you've been so generous about pointing out," I countered, trying to sound authoritative, despite the fact I was shivering and smelled like asphalt and despair. "Mitigate is not eliminated, Leo. And let's be frank, that is clearly a domestic-grade product, not professional. I Googled the SKU on your bucket last week." Oh, she had Googled the SKU. Of course she had. Brenda's hobby isn't knitting or bird-watching. It's competitive code enforcement. This interaction wasn't a chat. It was a highly dialogue-driven ambush, the 23rd in a series of increasingly absurd confrontations over the single most insignificant noise in our suburban neighborhood. The drip was quieter than her prize-winning Pomeranian's high-pitched yapping, but according to Brenda, it was an offense against God, nature, and the local bylaws. "Look, Brenda, I've tried the sealant, I've tried the drain socks, I've tried diverting the flow with a bent coat hanger, which surprisingly made it sound like a tiny, distressed flute. I have a professional coming next week." "Next week is too late," she snapped, stepping slightly closer to my property line, establishing dominance over the wet grass. Do you realize the damage this repetitive sound is doing to my concentration? I am trying to complete my quarterly reports, and that incessant plink is infiltrating my cognitive space. I lowered myself a rung, gripping the ladder tight. It's rain, Brenda. It's the sound of the sky shedding tears on our fragile existence. I can't stop the weather. You can maintain your property to prevent undue runoff and noise nuisance, she recited, clearly quoting a section of the HOA handbook. Section 9, subparagraph C, line 4. All external drainage systems must be maintained to operate silently and efficiently, preventing noise complaints and protecting adjacent flora from water contamination. I snorted. Water contamination? Brenda, this is rainwater. It came from a cloud. It's washing over your prized petunias. Those petunias are being splashed with unsanitary runoff, she declared, pointing an accusatory white-gloved finger at the aforementioned flowers, which looked perfectly fine, if a little soggy. This is a clean, modern suburban environment, Leo. We don't tolerate the auditory equivalent of a leaky faucet in a torture chamber. It lowers the collective property value. I looked at the dripping gutter, then at her clipboard. I looked at the rain, then back at Brenda's intensely serious face. She was deadly serious about a single drop of water. So, what's the official demand today, Brenda? I drain my gutter water into a silken pillow. I install a tiny, moisture-activated drone that intercepts the drop before it lands? I asked, leaning into the sarcasm with a dangerous grin. She didn't laugh. She didn't even twitch. Instead, she lifted the clipboard and pointed to a block of heavily annotated text. The time for levity is over, Leo. As of 10 minutes ago, I have officially filed a noise complaint with the Homeowners Association, citing the repeated infraction and your willful negligence. Furthermore, due to your failure to resolve the issue within the last 72 hours, I have called the local non-emergency police line, logging the complaint under acoustic nuisance chronic. You will be receiving a visit, I assure you. My grin faltered. She called the cops on my gutter? This wasn't just petty. This was an Olympic-level dedication to neighborhood terror. You called the police because of a drip? I asked, my voice flat with disbelief. I called the authorities because you failed to adhere to the covenants, she corrected me smugly. She then folded her umbrella with a crisp snap that was infinitely louder than my plink. You have 48 hours, Leo, 48 hours to silence the water torture. After that, I will engage the HOA's legal counsel, and the fines will begin. She turned, her waterproof trousers squeaking their victory march back toward her pristine property. I watched her go, standing halfway up the ladder, dripping, freezing, and filled with a volcanic mixture of impotent rage and the sudden crystal-clear conviction that I was done being the victim of her suburban tyranny. I climbed down, tossed the pathetic bucket of roofing cement into the yard, and wiped the rain from my face. The plink echoed one more time. Plink. 48 hours. Silence the water. Pay hundreds of dollars to a professional who would probably take weeks. Or I could meet her pettiness with genius. My defeat quickly morphed into vengeful, creative contemplation. I walked slowly toward my house, the sound of the rhythmic drop hitting the concrete playing in my ears. But this time, I wasn't hearing noise. I was hearing a beat, a hi-hat, a single, clear note. Fine, Brenda, I thought, kicking the ladder. You want rhythm? I'll give you a whole percussion section. You want silence? I'll give you performance art. You want to call the cops on a drip? I'll turn it into a water xylophone. I walked inside, slamming the door. The first battle was lost. The war, however, was about to become spectacularly musical. I peeled off my wet clothes, leaving a trail of damp polyester and professional-grade misery on my hardwood floor. I was soaked, freezing, and furiously trying to find a solution that didn't involve capitulating to Brenda's demands, which, in my current mental state, felt like giving up my identity. I paced my living room, the residual sound of the plink still vibrating in my ears like phantom limb pain. My mind raced through the acceptable and unacceptable ways to solve the problem. The proper way: call a reputable, licensed roofer. Wait 2 weeks for an estimate. Spend $1,200 on new copper and installation. Verdict: safe, boring, and makes Brenda right. Absolutely not. The illegal way: reroute the downspout so the runoff blasts directly into her prize petunia bed like a tiny, focused, muddy fire hose. Verdict: satisfying, but guarantees jail time and a permanent restraining order. Tempting, but too conventional. The nuclear way: buy a massive industrial fan, point it at the roof, and just blow the rain away. Verdict: brilliant, but probably a felony in my climate. The stupid way: install a miniature dam at the leak, forcing the water to pool and overflow back onto my roof. Verdict: solves the drip, creates an indoor waterfall. Expensive stupidity. The constant drip sound, though muffled by the walls, was the background track to my rage. It was like a single, obsessive thought hammering away at the thin walls of my sanity. I grabbed the remote, intending to watch 5 hours of mindless reality TV to drown out the noise, but instead landed on some public access documentary about Indonesian water percussion instruments. The host, a man with impossibly cheerful eyes and a rattan hat, was demonstrating a traditional bamboo instrument that was played by the flow of a small stream. The water hit different lengths of bamboo, creating a melodic, resonant cascade of notes. And then it hit me. It was a flash of mad, vengeful genius so potent it nearly knocked the remote out of my hand. Wait a minute. Brenda's complaint was about noise nuisance, specifically the plink, the random percussive sound of water hitting concrete. The noise ordinance she was quoting targeted non-aesthetic, persistent, irritating sound. What if the noise wasn't just a plink? What if it was a G-flat or a C major chord? What if the sound of the water wasn't a nuisance, but music? The idea was crazy, it was petty, and it was technically not an illegal noise. It would transform my leaky gutter from a structural defect into a functional, passive, rain-activated artistic feature. I sprang off the couch, grabbing my laptop. I wasn't just fixing a leak. I was launching a full-scale acoustic counteroffensive. I was going to turn that miserable, annoying drip into a water xylophone. I was going to weaponize my gutter against its biggest enemy. The next 3 hours were spent in a hyper-focused, caffeine-fueled dive into the absurd world of applied acoustics, drainage codes, and musical physics. This section was primarily internal monologue and snappy descriptions of confusing diagrams, narrated with the snark of a man who suddenly believes he is a blend of Nikola Tesla and Weird Al Yankovic. I started by Googling how to make water music without being a weirdo. Google replied with links to Japanese rock gardens and, bizarrely, a lot of videos of competitive bubble wrap popping. My search history quickly devolved into a terrifying string of technical queries. Query 1. Pitch based on water volume copper pipe. Result: pages of complex physics equations involving density, resonant frequency, and something called the Young's modulus. I spent an hour Googling pitch based on water volume, and now I'm pretty sure I need a new degree. I decided to stick to the kindergarten method. More water. Lower note. Query 2. Municipal Noise Ordinance definition of melodic noise. Result: pages of legal jargon. The key takeaway: most U.S. noise ordinances focus on decibel levels of continuous, mechanical, or amplified sound, lawn mowers, power tools, loud parties. Naturally occurring sounds, even highly irritating ones, like the incessant barking of a certain Pomeranian, are often in a gray area. But music is an entirely different beast, often regulated by time of day. My device would only operate when it rained, and it wasn't amplified. Advantage: Leo. Query 3. Is gutter art a code violation? Result: mostly Pinterest boards showing people who had installed decorative chains instead of downspouts. Nothing about copper tubing and tuned glass jars. The Architectural Committee of the HOA is going to have to make a ruling on found object acoustic sculpture. That thought alone gave me the will to live. I mapped out the plan. The water would exit the leaky spot, hit a narrow copper pipe, the first note, flow down a specially angled PVC channel, and then strike a series of glass jars filled to specific, calibrated levels to produce an 8-note scale. 8 notes, I murmured to myself, clicking a pen against my teeth. That's enough for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Or perhaps a highly satirical cover of the HOA theme song, if there is one. Armed with a terrible diagram drawn on the back of a pizza box, I headed to the nearest hardware store, my internal monologue humming with a kind of manic glee. This was not a repair trip. This was a heist. The next hour was a blur of bizarre decisions. I was walking proof that when a man combines pettiness with home improvement, things get weird. My shopping list: the ingredients of revenge. 7 feet of thin-gauge copper tubing for maximum tinkle factor. A selection of PVC piping connectors for redirecting the flow of creative justice. 1 large bag of plaster of Paris for anchoring everything firmly to the house. A delicate handheld kitchen scale for measuring the precise water volume in the resonators. A box of mismatched glass jars. I opted for the fancy Italian pasta sauce jars. They have a better chime. A funnel the size of a traffic cone, just for dramatic effect. My interactions with the confused store clerks were the first external dialogue focus that day. I approached the elderly gentleman at the plumbing desk, Norm, whose expression suggested he had seen it all. Until now. "Can I help you find something, son?" Norm asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, Norm. I need 3 yards of that 3/4-inch copper tubing, but I need you to assure me it has high sonic resonance when struck by liquid runoff." Norm blinked. "High. Sonic. What?" "It's copper, kid. It handles water." No, you see, I need to know if it can reliably transmit a C-sharp, depending on the fluid pressure," I insisted, pointing frantically at my pizza box diagram. "It's an ambient, hydrological, percussive installation." Norm frowned. "So, you're building a rain-activated instrument?" I leaned in conspiratorially, lowering my voice. "No, sir, I'm building a passive-aggressive noise compliance system. The sound has to be melodic. It has to be art. Otherwise, my neighbor, Brenda, will deploy the Homeowners Association's legal team, and frankly, I don't have the mental capacity for that kind of fight." Norm paused, then slowly nodded, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of understanding that transcended plumbing. He had clearly met a Brenda before. "Ah, petty neighbor warfare. That copper tubing is high grade. Should give you a real nice ping when the velocity is right. Good luck, son. Give 'em hell. I left the store with my ridiculous haul, feeling like a warrior who had just acquired his magic weapons. Brenda wanted to fight dirty? Well, I was about to fight symphonically. I had the raw materials for a gutter-based opera. I returned home, my confidence high, only to be immediately humbled by the sheer engineering complexity of my plan. I'm a writer, not a structural engineer. I needed to mount a series of fragile glass jars, connected by precisely angled copper and PVC, to the side of my house. This required drilling, bracing, and probably some light welding. I called 3 different local contractors. This section was almost pure, agonizingly funny dialogue. Larry answered with a sigh that suggested his life was a series of disappointing gutters. Larry's Gutter Solutions. We stop the water, we stop the headache. What's your problem? Larry, I love that slogan. I have a problem, but it's less about stopping the water and more about directing it melodically, I said, trying to sound like a visionary. Larry was silent. You got a leak? Yes, but I want to leverage the leak's flow rate into an 8-note chromatic scale, which will then fall into a collection of tuned glass jars to produce a pleasant, high-frequency sound, thus rendering the noise complaint moot. Sir, are you high? No, Larry, I'm just legally embattled. I need someone to mount this system. It requires precise leveling and securing the resonators so they don't swing in the wind. Larry began to breathe heavily into the phone. Listen, buddy. I replace downspouts. I put up screens. I don't build instruments for petty vengeance. The liability alone. What if a kid tunes his guitar to your copper pipe? What if the wind blows a G flat? I'm out. You need a simple downspout replacement. My quote is $700. Take it or leave it. I'm not touching your weird musical scheme. He hung up, ending the call by muttering something about therapy. I found Maria on a website that described her as a kinetic metal sculptor and tradeswoman. Perfect. She sounded artsy enough to understand. Hello, this is Maria. I hear you have a project. Her voice was cool and bohemian. Maria, I'm installing a rain-activated kinetic, acoustic sculpture on the facade of my home. Specifically, a water xylophone that plays Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I explained, leaning into the performance art angle. Fascinating! A truly Zen kinetic sculpture, Maria gushed. The interplay of natural forces and structured pitch. Are we using brass or aluminum for a sharper attack? Copper, Maria, and pasta sauce jars, I admitted. There was a slight pause, but she recovered quickly. Rustic. I love it. Now, for the mounting system, I'll need to create a custom, weatherproof steel armature welded directly to the frame with micro-adjustment screws to ensure pitch stability. Then we'll secure the copper and PVC channeling. This is a minimum of 3 days of highly specialized artistic labor. And the quote? Since it is an outdoor installation, a piece of public-facing art, I'm going to have to charge you the full design and fabrication rate, $27,000. I nearly dropped the phone. Maria, I'm trying to annoy my neighbor, not fund a space program. Thank you, but I think I'm going to have to find someone slightly less dedicated to the beauty of the craft. Defeated and desperate, I found Bob, whose online listing simply read, Bob, I fix stuff. Cheap. Bob showed up in a pickup truck that looked like it had fought and lost a war with gravity. He was a kindly, gap-toothed man in his 60s who wore a perpetually confused expression, probably because he was slightly hard of hearing. So, you want me to put up a bird feeder? Bob asked, squinting at the pile of copper pipes and glass jars in my yard. No, Bob. A water-powered instrument. Look, The water drips here. I pointed to the leak. It hits this copper pipe, which is note number 1, and then it slides down this PVC into these jars, which are tuned with different amounts of water for notes 2 through 8. Tuned jars, Bob repeated slowly, nodding. Like wind chimes. Exactly. But intentional wind chimes. It must be absolutely level, Bob, or the notes will be flat. I'm trying to avoid a lawsuit here. Bob shrugged, pulling a rusted toolbox out of his truck. Kid, I put up a mailbox on a 70-degree angle last week. I think I can handle some jars. Just tell me where to drill. The installation was pure chaos. Bob kept trying to secure the jars with duct tape, insisting it was load-bearing tape. I had to narrate the chaos of trying to explain precise water-level tuning to a man whose primary tool was a sledgehammer. Every 10 minutes, he would shout, "So, more wind chimes?" And I would have to shout back, "No, Bob, it's a G-sharp. It's musical compliance." It took 5 hours, but eventually the Rube Goldbergian monstrosity was secured to the side of my house. Midway through Bob awkwardly attaching the copper tubing to the siding, a police cruiser arrived, silent and ominous. It rolled to a stop right next to Bob's truck. Brenda, of course, was watching from her bay window, probably, sipping tea and charting the officer's GPS coordinates. This was a direct result of her second non-emergency call. 2 officers got out. Rookie Officer Miller, fresh-faced and carrying a notebook the size of a cinder block, and cynical Detective Jones, who looked like he hadn't slept since the invention of the automobile. "We have a report of unauthorized architectural modification and excessive tinkling," Miller read from his notebook, looking genuinely bewildered. I wiped plaster off my hands, attempting to look like a dedicated, law-abiding artisan. Bob just waved cheerfully from the ladder. "Officers, thank you for responding to this tragic case of property standards enforcement," I began, adopting a tone of injured dignity. "I am Leo, the homeowner. And this," I gestured dramatically toward the copper and jar-studded wall, "is my new, legally compliant, passive rain-harvesting musical feature." Detective Jones stared at the wall, then at me. "Son, that looks like a still for making bathtub moonshine." "With all due respect, Detective," I replied, "I am installing a system that manages rainwater runoff while providing an intermittent, high-frequency tonal output that is exempt from the low-frequency noise ordinance cited by my neighbor." Miller squinted at his notepad. "Intermittent, high-frequency, tinkling. Sir, are you trying to play music with rainwater?" "Officer, I am installing a noise solution," I corrected him. "See? It's art. It's an acoustic hydrodynamic response to a noise complaint. It solves the issue by transforming the alleged nuisance into a melodic, community-enhancing performance piece." Detective Jones sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, we just need to verify that this isn't, a safety hazard or violating zoning laws." He turned to Bob. "What's the purpose of those jars, sir?" Bob, still confused, cupped his ear. "Huh? Oh, they catch the drips. Stops the splash, makes a chime." "Right," Jones muttered. "The standoff. Since it's not currently raining, Leo, I need you to demonstrate this acoustic feature. If it makes an illegal noise, we write a citation." I grabbed the garden hose and, with a flourish, directed a small stream of water into the top of the gutter. The water hit the first copper pipe. Clang! Then sputtered down the PVC, missing 3 of the jars entirely, and producing a ridiculously poor, off-key sequence that ended with a large gurgle as the main drain backed up. It was less an instrument, and more the sound of a sick robot throwing up silverware. The cops stared. Bob scratched his head. Detective Jones snapped his notebook shut. Well, that's definitely not music, he said dryly. But it's not a continuous low-frequency nuisance. It's bad performance art. There is no standing ordinance against that. We're done here, Miller. Have a nice day, Mr. Leo. Please try not to build anything else that requires a tuning fork. The cops left, utterly bewildered. I, however, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated victory. I had called their bluff, and my pathetic, sputtering musical contraption had won the first round. Leo the Xylophone Maestro was now invincible. Bob finished securing the last of the jar mountings, pocketed the cash, and drove off, muttering something about maybe taking up ceramics. Now, the real, painstaking work began. The tuning. For the next 4 hours, I was lost in an obsessive world of millimeter adjustments. I had 8 glass jars, my resonators, each needing to hold a specific volume of water to achieve a perfect, high-pitched scale. I downloaded a digital tuning app and started meticulously calibrating. This was less like engineering and more like torturing a sensitive electronic scale. I used an eyedropper to add water and a tiny syringe to extract it. Okay, jar number 1, I whispered, tapping the glass with a small metal spoon. Ping! The app read D-flat. Too high, need more water for a C. Come on, C. I dripped in 3 drops. Plunk. Now it was a B-flat. I spent a good 20 minutes trying to nudge it back. I was aiming for a simple, recognizable, yet mildly irritating melody. A simplified version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, C, C, G, G, A, G. It was nursery rhyme simple, yet somehow deeply disrespectful in this context. It was acoustic mockery. Finally, after exhausting my ability to hear tiny differences in pitch, I stood back. The water xylophone, a series of polished copper pipes directing water into 8 labeled half-full pasta sauce jars, was ready. All that was missing was the rain. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of pre-storm humidity. I sat by the window, waiting, adrenaline pumping. This was the moment of truth. Would it work, or would it just be a chaotic mess of glass and water? Then, the sky cracked. The rain arrived with the fury of a disappointed deity, signaled by a sudden clap of thunder that shook the house. I rushed to the window just as the first serious sheet of water poured into the newly fixed-up gutter. The flow hit the top pipe. Ting! A clear sea. The water rushed down, perfectly channeled by Bob's oddly effective, slightly bent PVC pipe. Ting! The second C. Ping! A perfect G. Ping! The second G. Tinkle! The A. It worked. It was loud, crystal clear, and utterly ridiculous. The sound was high-pitched, resonant, and unmistakably melodic. It was the world's most aggressive wind chime, playing a lullaby of suburban spite. I didn't have to wait long. Brenda, alerted by the non-drip sound, burst out of her house clutching her umbrella like a sword. She stopped dead at the edge of her lawn, taking in the sight of my musical drainage system, currently performing its one-song repertoire with cheerful, tinny enthusiasm. Her face, usually a mask of tightly controlled disapproval, went through 3 distinct phases. Confusion. She tilted her head, trying to process the source of the high-pitched, tinkling music. Dawning horror. She recognized the copper pipes and the row of jars, realizing the depths of my spite. White-hot rage. She let out a small, strangled noise, the sound of a lawyer realizing she's been checkmated by a plumbing joke. She stalked across her lawn and stopped precisely at the property line. The rain was coming down hard now, making the xylophone play faster and louder. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are," sang my gutter. "Leo!" she shrieked. "What in the name of God is that monstrosity?" I opened my window just a crack, forcing her to lean in to hear me over the downpour. "Why, Brenda," I shouted back, feigning innocence. "It's my new acoustically engineered, non-motorized, rain-fed hydrological feature. It's managing the runoff perfectly. And look, no plink. Just a lovely melodic C major sequence. The complaint has been rendered moot." She started to physically attack the performance. She held her umbrella under the main copper pipe, but the water just splashed around it. She tried to hold a towel under a jar, but the rhythmic ping just sounded muffled, not silenced. Her attempts to interrupt the concert were narrated with glee by me. "Go on, Brenda. Fight the music. Fight the relentless, high-pitched sound of a children's rhyme." After 10 minutes of watching Brenda battle a glass jar, I grabbed my phone, filmed the xylophone in action, and posted it to my social media accounts. Caption: Karen complained about my drip, so I gave her a whole symphony. Guttered xylophone, petty with a purpose, acoustic compliance. The video immediately went viral. The sheer audacity of the creation, coupled with the visible rage of Brenda in the background, was internet gold. By the time the rain stopped an hour later, I had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Leo was now a local legend. My front yard, previously a no-fly zone of awkward silence, became a gathering spot during the next few rain showers. Other neighbors, previously silent, started leaving small, supportive comments on my fence, written on napkins, which I stored as evidence of community support. Signs and deliveries. A 6-pack of craft beer was left on my doorstep with a note. From Team Xylophone. Old Mr. Henderson, 2 doors down, gave me a thumbs up while walking his dog. One woman, who I had never spoken to, drove past slowly, yelling, "Play it again, Leo!" The community was officially split. Team Brenda versus Team Xylophone. My neighbors, tired of Brenda's endless rules and complaints, saw the gutter Xylo as an act of liberation. Brenda, meanwhile, escalated. She called the HOA, the city council, and code enforcement. But I had anticipated every move. I had ensured the device was mounted just within the legal setback limits. I printed out the entire municipal code, highlighting the section that defined noise. The ordinance defined noise as continuous, low-frequency sound, like a compressor or generator, not intermittent, high-frequency melodic percussion. My defense was watertight. I didn't create a noise. I created a compliant, melodic sound management system. The stage was set for the legal battle, and I had the perfect musical ammunition. 2 days later, the code enforcement officer arrived. This wasn't a sympathetic local cop. This was bureaucratic gravity personified. Meet Gary. Gary wore pressed khaki trousers, had a laminated photo ID the size of a paperback book, and drove a white sedan that screamed unjustifiable fines. He was armed with a massive decibel meter and a zoning clipboard that looked like it contained the secrets of the universe. The rain had paused, but Brenda had requested a full demonstration under simulated duress. So I was standing by with the garden hose again. "Mr. Leo, Gary started, adjusting his belt. His voice was flat, designed to convey zero emotion. I am here regarding complaint number 2024-447, filed by Ms. B. Henderson, concerning a persistent noise nuisance and unauthorized structural alteration. Gary, I replied, extending my hand, which he ignored. Please allow me to put your mind at ease. What you see is not an alteration. It is a feature. It is an acoustically engineered, rain-fed hydrological feature designed specifically to comply with the low-frequency noise ordinance. Gary consulted his clipboard. The complaint states you are operating a musical instrument that interrupts the peace. Only when it rains, Gary, I said smoothly. And musical instrument is reductive. It is a passive runoff velocity regulator. The copper tubing directs the water flow, preventing the chaotic plink sound and distributing the kinetic energy into tuned glass resonators. I picked up the hose. Watch. The water flow, which was previously a non-compliant acoustic stressor, is now channeled. The sound produced is intermittent, high frequency, and melodic. It is, by definition, aesthetically positive sound. I let the hose run twinkle. Twinkle, little star tinkled out, even louder than before. Gary held the decibel meter up. He frowned. The reading was low. It was definitely under the allowed limits for continuous noise. The volume is compliant, Gary admitted grudgingly. But the HOA manual states external features must be aesthetically pleasing. Aesthetically pleasing is subjective, Gary. My neighbors are leaving me beer and calling me a legend, I countered, pointing to the supportive notes on my fence. The community has voted. But let's look at the law, shall we? I pulled out the printout of the municipal code, highlighted in 3 different colors. Noise is defined here, section 4.7a, as any mechanical device producing a sound exceeding 60 dB at the property line for more than 15 consecutive seconds. My device is non-mechanical, and the sound is inherently intermittent, tied directly to an act of nature. Furthermore, the high-frequency tonal output is exempt from the low-frequency regulation Brenda cited. Gary ran a hand over his face. He was defeated by the sheer absurdity of the paperwork. So you're saying this is a drain that happens to be musical? I'm saying it's a rainwater management system that happens to have a high-frequency tonal output, I confirmed. I look forward to your report confirming my compliance. Gary packed up his clipboard with the look of a man who suddenly questioned every career choice he had ever made. He left with a muttered promise to file the appropriate disposition. Advantage? Leo. I was still basking in the glow of my bureaucratic victory when the blue lights returned. It was Detective Jones and Rookie Miller again, looking even more drained than before. Brenda had played her last card, a 911 call claiming hostile musical aggression and psychological warfare. Mr. Leo, Jones began, his voice flat. Brenda is claiming you are using your gutter instrument to harass her. Detective, I am home, I am silent, and my apparatus is only activated by the will of the heavens, I said, holding my hands up. If God wants to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, who are we to stop him? Jones turned to Miller. Miller, did you bring the audio logs? Yes, Detective. We've logged 5 distinct complaints of musical nuisance over the last 2 days. One specifically mentioned the repetitive nature of the tune. I saw the look in Jones's eye. He was tired, but he was also impressed. He had to be fair, though. Brenda was technically his constituent. Jones sighed, pulling a pristine white card from his pocket. An official police finding. He delivered the police finding with perfect dryness, clearly enjoying the moment of delivering official police ridicule. Mr. Leo, the department has determined that while irritating, your water feature is compliant with City Code 4.7b, subsection Ornamental Non-Motorized Water Features. The Code Enforcement Office confirms compliance. However, based on the volume and frequency of the complaints, Jones paused for dramatic effect. We are recommending a performance schedule. I blinked. A performance schedule? Yes, Jones continued, struggling to keep his face straight. We recommend you tune your instrument to a less recognizable melody to reduce the perception of targeted harassment. We cannot enforce this, but we are recommending it for neighborhood peace. I couldn't help but laugh. The police had officially recommended I change the song My Gutter plays. Just then, Brenda appeared again, storming onto the lawn, still in her safari vest, demanding to hear the police conclusion. "Well, has this maniac been cited? Is that contraption coming down?" she demanded, pointing at the xylophone. Detective Jones, clearly done with both of us, simply pointed to the xylophone. "Ma'am, it stays. It's compliant. However, Mr. Leo here has been asked to adjust the music." Brenda's face crumpled. She was completely defeated. Her whole campaign, her HOA calls, her 911 calls, her code enforcement citations, all negated by pasta sauce jars and a children's rhyme. "Then I demand," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger, "that he stop playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It is an insult. It is mocking my very existence." I smiled, a wide, genuine, victorious smile. "Brenda," I said, leaning out the window, "I hear you. You know what? That tune is getting a little stale. I'll make you a deal." I raised my hand. "I will retune the entire system. I promise you, next time it rains, you will hear something entirely new. Something peaceful." She looked at me, suspicion warring with total exhaustion. "Peaceful?" "Perfectly peaceful," I affirmed. "It's the least I can do for my valued neighbor." She glared one last time, turned, and stomped back toward her house. The war was over, and the next composition was already forming in my head. I spent the next day painstakingly retuning the water xylophone. This time, there was no vengeance, just pure acoustic satisfaction. I didn't tune it for a melody. I tuned it for harmony. I aimed for a single, four-note, incredibly soothing C major chord, C, E, G, C. It was simple, resonant, and had the clean, ethereal sound of high-end wind chimes. It was still rain-activated, still a constant reminder of my victory, but now it was genuinely pleasant. The next rainstorm arrived quietly. Brenda didn't even come outside. She stayed at her window, watching. When the water flowed, it hit the copper pipes, and instead of the cheeky sing-song tinkle of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the air filled with a shimmering, cascading chime, the perfect, resonant sound of a C major chord, repeated gently by the flow of water. It sounded like wind chimes made of ice. It was gorgeous. Brenda was defeated. The music was technically compliant, aesthetically pleasing, even to her, and completely non-threatening. She retreated into her house, only occasionally glaring from behind her curtains. The gutter guard had been silenced by a symphony. My video, of course, blew up even bigger. People were demanding custom gutter xylophones. Leo's Xylo Systems was born. My new side business, bespoke, passive-aggressive, acoustic compliance systems. I started taking commissions from people with noisy neighbors, turning dripping condensate lines into pentatonic scales. The final word on the matter came 2 months later, in the form of a heavily laminated postcard slipped under my door. It was from Brenda. It didn't mention the music. It just said, "Your mailbox flag is slightly askew. Please correct immediately." I smiled. Some battles are never truly over. But now, I had peace, or at least peaceful C major. I had used a ridiculous idea to defeat bureaucracy, pettiness, and suburban rage. I was vindicated, viral, and slightly famous. So yeah, Brenda complained about a drip. Now, every time it rains, I get a standing ovation from the internet and a soothing chord on my front porch, pretty. Good deal for a noisy gutter, huh?